Well, which team do you think has the best chance to get far in the playoffs? We'll start with 5A and then go with 4A.
5A, it's absolutely Ball High. If just the way that they play together, and a lot of teams, they're dependent on one or two players to get things done. But Ball High's not like that. They have 6 guys who could score 12 to 15 points any night. It's hard to stop a team,
and they're all confident.
That has that ability.
That's what amazes me about
Absolutely.
them.
And I think if you look at the history of teams that make it to Austin, there's always a star on that team. But when you watch those teams, you realize, boy, that bench is deep, or they've got 5 other guys who actually contribute, make it just look better. And I think Corey's point's got to be well taken here. Those are the type of teams that do advance far. They have the one superstar everyone pays attention to, but the rest of the guys are who really carries them.
And obviously, you have to think about last year. I mean, Ball High had a lot of momentum going into the playoffs and then lost in that first round. I was at that game. Fort Bend Bush just really had this big goon in the middle that was bulldozing through the smaller Ball High team, and the officials weren't calling anything. I mean, there was some questionable officiating in that game. So hopefully they don't run into as tough a first-round matchup. And I think if they do get past that first round, I think they're definitely a legit chance to go pretty far in there, maybe up to regionals, and then anything can happen when you get there.
I think last year what we saw with the whole Fort Bend district sweeping, the 23 5A district in both boys and girls in the first round, that's pretty rare. I mean, to predict that to happen again, I don't know that you can. And if for some reason the Fort Bend schools win 7 out of 8 of those games, counting the boys and the girls, the one that they're not going to win is this year against Ball High. I mean, maybe they will, but I'm just saying I don't see that happening 2 years in a row.
Right.
And if Ball High can get past that first game, they absolutely can get to the regional semis, where maybe waiting for them would be undefeated and #1 ranked Strike Jesuit. But who knows what can happen at that point.
How about in 4A?
4A, this is where TJ and I disagree. I absolutely think it's Texas City. Their first round game will be against the 4th place team at a 23 4A. You're talking about Bay City or El Campo, one of those teams. If Texas City is, only losing 1-2 games max in their district now, they're not going to have any trouble with the 4th place team in that district. Then you're talking about playing probably Houston Waltrip or Houston Sharpstown. I looked at their schedules. Yeah, they're good. I mean, they're probably going to finish second to Houston Jones. To Yates. And there's nothing wrong with finishing second to Yates.
Not at all.
Not at all.
And Waltrip and Sharpstown, like I said, they're good, but you look at their whole work, their schedule, it doesn't jump out at you like, wow. I mean, I see some teams they've lost to that other teams in Galveston County have beaten. So that doesn't shock me at all. It wouldn't shock me at all if Texas City could get that game. And then the 3rd round would likely be against Jones. Good team, but consider this. The last game of the non-district schedule. Yeah, you think this is funny.
I know where you're going with this.
Last game of the non-district schedule, the last tournament in Port Arthur. Lamarck beat Houston Jones by 6. 1 week later, Texas City beat Lamarck by 22 at home. That same night, Houston Jones goes and beats Houston Wheatley by 6. Wheatley was #1 in the state at that time. So you're telling me that it's totally ridiculous that Texas City could beat Houston Jones?
I won't say it's totally ridiculous.
I just say it's unlikely. The one thing in football in the playoffs, the Houston teams are really weak. Basketball, it's not. It's a different game. And I think you can look at their schedule, maybe their district schedule, Jones, Wheatley, all of them, and say, maybe. But then when you realize it's like comparing the SEC to the Big 12. And I'm just telling you that the Houston districts are like the SEC when it comes to basketball. They beat up on each other, but when it comes to the playoffs, all of a sudden it's like, where do these guys weren't that good? And people say that. And if you just, and as again, the one thing I see is a weakness for Texas City. And Coach Emerson even said this the other night against Santa Fe, of all people, kind of exposes them. They get real frustrated if people just pass the ball around on them. Because they're so anxious to get out there and get Greg the ball and start shooting it. And a team that's smart can play some good fundamental basketball. It's going to frustrate that team and that's what happens. You run into 2 different styles of teams in the playoffs. the fast running guns who have that fast breakdown like you wouldn't believe it can break any press, or you got the guys that are going to go that fundamental pass the ball then shoot. And if Texas City runs into that, I think they're done for. And that's what concerns me. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what concerns me.
I disagree. Texas City has all the pieces. They have great guard play. It's not just Greg Wilson. Marcus Williams can make that team go. And they have a dominant inside presence in Isaiah Matthews. There's no team that is going to be matched up and say, we are better at every position than Texas City is. And you're telling me if they get into a playoff game with one of those Houston ISD schools and Texas City wants to run, all those Houston kids, what do they do growing up? They grew up on the playground, you run. You're telling me that they're not going to think back to those days and say, oh, these guys want to run. We can run with them. Maybe they won't be disciplined enough to slow down like they've been supposed to.
Yeah, and that, as I said, the only thing I look at that is Texas City turns the ball over a lot. And they have, in the games that I've seen with them, they've had a high turnover rate. Except against Santa Fe the other night, it was real low. But that's the other thing concerning me, is just that ball control.
What would concern me about Texas City is just the lack of playoff experience, just because, I mean, it's a different game when you do get into the playoffs. That's why I kind of still, and you know, we'll see Friday night if I could be completely wrong, because Texas City could go and beat Lamarck by 22 again. But I still think Lamarck has a couple wins in them come playoff time.
And it's a revenge game. Yeah,
yeah.
I think Lamarck.
And I mean, Lamarck's deep, and they got a few guys that can take shots and make them in clutch situations. So I still haven't given up on Lamarck. I still think they have a playoff run in them as well. So that's it for the boys hoops side. Check out the girls hoops, which we'll do right after this. Thanks.